They believed they were simply detaining another man who matched the description. But when he appeared in court the following day, dressed in a suit and not handcuffed, they realized they had made the gravest error of their careers. It was just after 9 in the morning when the dispatch call went out. Black male, mid-30s, wearing a navy jacket, suspected in a car break-in on Madison Avenue. Officers Brandon Halcroft and Lauren Mercer were already driving down the street in their patrol car, sipping coffee. Half paying attention, they exchanged a look as if it were a joke. "There he is," Brandon murmured, nodding toward a man standing outside Grange Bakehouse, one of the busiest cafes in downtown Boise. The man seemed calm and composed, scrolling through something on his phone, holding a bag with a croissant in one hand. He loosely fit the description, and that was sufficient for them. Brandon parked quickly without turning on the sirens or warning lights. Lauren had already stepped out of the car before the tires stopped moving. She yelled, "Hey, hands where I can see them!" The man, Kevin Myers, looked up surprised but not alarmed. "Excuse me, you match the suspect's description," Brandon added, stepping closer with his hand near his holster. "I'm just standing outside a bakery," Kevin said, confused, "waiting for my driver." Lauren rolled her eyes and said they would sort it out at the station. Kevin barely had time to answer when Brandon grabbed his arm and spun him around. "You're resisting now," he declared loudly enough for the onlookers to hear. The crowd gathered, phones appeared, but Kevin did not struggle. He said nothing further, his gaze fixed on the pavement as they fastened the restraints on his wrists. Lauren grinned, amused at how people always get talkative until they feel the cold metal. Probably just another guy with a fake LinkedIn profile and some tall tale about his qualifications. Brandon chimed in with a laugh. They did not read him his rights or ask for identification. They never checked his phone or the shopping bag that clearly held a receipt inside. Instead, they shoved him into the back seat of the patrol car and drove off, already making jokes about the report they would have to write later. Inside the vehicle, Kevin stared straight ahead in silence. "You got anything to say?" Brandon asked over his shoulder. Kevin's voice remained calm. "I want my phone call." Brandon grimaced, replying, "You will get it after booking." Yet something in Kevin's tone, measured, patient, almost indifferent, cracked their confidence. Not enough to stop them, but just enough to make Brandon glance back once more. In the rearview mirror, Kevin was neither afraid nor rattled. He was far from finished. At the station, booking moved slowly. The desk officer, a man named Ryan Tate, blinked twice when the suspect was brought in. Guys, are you sure about this one?" Brandon waved him off casually. It was a call about a car break-in. Kevin was loitering outside a bakery, holding a pastry bag and a phone, he said softly. Lauren stepped forward. "Are you questioning a field call, Tate?" Ryan frowned, hesitated, then took Kevin's information. He glanced at the screen and did a double take at the address. "I want my call now," Kevin said quietly, breaking into the conversation again, catching Brandon by surprise. Brandon raised his eyebrows and asked, "Who are you going to call? A lawyer friend?" "No," Kevin replied calmly. "The Attorney General's office." Brandon laughed as if that was the funniest thing he had heard all week. "Sure. Tell him we said hello." They walked away, but Ryan Tate did not laugh. He kept his gaze fixed on the screen. That moment marked the beginning of a major change. What Brandon and Lauren failed to realize was just how deeply they were already in over their heads. The holding cell was chilly, not freezing, yet steadily cold enough to seep into your wrists when your hands were still cuffed. Kevin sat on the bench with an upright posture, neither relaxed nor rigid. Despite wearing jeans and a jacket, he looked sharp. His polished boots and clean-cut appearance radiated a sense of control. Down the hallway, Brandon leaned against a vending machine, casually opening a soda as if it were just another ordinary day. "Look at his expression," he said to Lauren. "Like he thinks he's untouchable." Lauren took a sip of her coffee and replied, "That kind always shows up in the wealthy area, acting like the rules don't apply to them." "Same story every time," Brandon chuckled. "My favorite part is when they start babbling about lawsuits and badges as if we haven't heard that a million times." Neither noticed the internal affairs officer passing by the front desk, nor that Ryan Tate had quietly moved into a back office to speak on a secured line while the others waited in the holding area. Kevin finally got through on his call without hesitation or scrolling through his phone. He simply dialed. "This is Morgan," he stated once the line connected. "Boise Police Department, Madison Avenue incident. I will need all the information by this afternoon." He ended the call calmly, without frustration or noise, just a clean break. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds, but that was enough. Later that day, the precinct's chief received a concise and direct email from the State Department of Civil Oversight. It was a flagged alert demanding the immediate release of the detainee. Included were Morgan's credentials, links to a federal database profile, and a notification of an audit under Article 14 of the State Law Enforcement Integrity Act. The message did not come from a lawyer, but from the Attorney General's liaison. Within 45 minutes, Morgan was free. When Brandon saw Morgan again, it was in the hallway. Not shackled or behind bars, but calmly walking past with two state officials dressed in suits. Brandon blinked as if the light had suddenly changed. "That cannot be happening," he whispered. Lauren narrowed her eyes. "What on earth is going on?" Meanwhile, Ryan Tate observed quietly from his desk. He said nothing but typed something into a system inaccessible to others. Morgan never looked back. He gave no glances or smirks. He simply walked away with the same steady pace he'd arrived with. The silence he left was heavier than any siren that night. Later, Brandon had dinner with his brother. Brandon angrily complained about people with connections, calling it favoritism, and saying it smelled like political maneuvering. Lauren, sitting on her porch with a beer, told her friend it was probably some confusion at City Hall, and that the man would eventually face charges. After all, nobody moves so smoothly without hiding something. But as the days passed, rumors spread. Quiet talks started within the department when someone mentioned Kevin's name during a briefing. Two sergeants exchanged glances. One officer said Kevin used to serve in Oakland and held a senior position in a watchdog organization. Even Captain Ryan began acting differently, giving brief answers and choosing his words carefully. When Kevin's name was brought up, Brandon grew uneasy. If command was worried, that meant serious trouble was brewing. Lauren dismissed his concerns, saying, "We have body cameras. We have the call logs. We are following procedures." Brandon agreed, but his nod was forced. His gut twisted uncomfortably because something about Kevin didn't fit, not in the way they had anticipated. The fact that Kevin left without creating a scene was unusual for someone guilty. Still, they returned to their duties as if nothing had shifted. Yet reality was already overtaking them because by the time they sensed the ground moving beneath them, Kevin was already on higher terrain, observing everything. The courthouse in downtown Boise did not feel grand or overpowering. It simply consisted of concrete steps, glass doors, and the sound of footsteps echoing through vast corridors. Brandon and Lauren walked side by side, both sharply dressed in neatly pressed blue suits with polished badges, faces void of any expression. This was a routine procedure for them. They had been in courtrooms more times than they could remember. The charge was straightforward: obstructing an investigation into a stolen vehicle. They assumed Kevin would arrive late, probably accompanied by a lawyer, hoping to create a scene. Yet Kevin was nowhere outside, not in the waiting area, and he wasn't even listed on the docket. As they passed through security, a bailiff greeted them with a solemn nod and said, "You two are testifying in courtroom 2C. Brandon responded, "Halcroft and Mercer, this is the Myers case." The bailiff blinked and remarked, "Morgan is not the defendant." Brandon frowned and asked, "Come again?" The bailiff only pointed toward the courtroom. When they stepped inside courtroom 2C, everything felt strange but not chaotic or loud, just unusual. The room was packed, yet not with the typical crowd of anxious defendants and frustrated attorneys. Instead, there were reporters and 2 camera crews, along with someone from the city council. Brandon's neck stiffened as his eyes locked onto the front table. Sitting next to the judge was Kevin Morgan, without handcuffs or a defense lawyer. He appeared as a composed man in a dark, tailored suit, calmly flipping through a binder. A nameplate in front of him read, "Special Counsel for Civil Accountability, State of Idaho." Lauren leaned in and whispered, "What is this?" Brandon quietly replied, "I have no idea. This was not in the case notes." The judge then called the room to order. Today's meeting focuses on reviewing the procedures followed during a recent arrest on Madison Avenue, she explained. Mr. Myers will participate as an advisor representing the state's Civil Accountability Office. Lauren's jaw tightened while Brandon appeared as if he had been caught off guard. Kevin did not glance their way even once. He simply leaned back as the judge addressed the front of the courtroom. "Officers Halcroft and Mercer, please come forward." They moved with stiffness, no longer in command, feeling every gaze in the room fixed on them. However, this was not the admiration they were familiar with, but rather intense examination. The judge inquired, "Could you explain the justification behind detaining Mr. Morgan?" Brandon cleared his throat and responded, "We received a dispatch describing a black male in a navy jacket." Mr. Morgan had no criminal history, prompting the judge to interrupt. "No record with your department either. Was his identification verified before detainment?" Lauren answered, "He matched the description and failed to comply with our commands." Kevin did not raise his eyes but clicked his pen once with slow precision. The judge then turned toward him and asked, "Mr. Morgan, do you have anything to clarify?" For the first time, he looked directly at everyone and calmly began, "In my profession, I have read countless reports that start in a similar fashion. Ambiguous descriptions and unchecked assumptions. Eventually, these repeated patterns reveal a bigger story. Holding a badge does not place you above accountability." Lauren opened her mouth to speak, but Kevin raised a finger to pause her. Addressing the judge, "I would like to file a motion to pause the direct testimony. Today an internal review was approved, and a hearing will take place in a fortnight." The courtroom fell silent as the judge nodded in agreement. Brandon and Lauren remained silent, stepping back, stunned. Kevin Myers closed his binder calmly and rose to his feet. He did not look victorious or smug, but his presence carried more weight than any argument could have. As he exited, the reporters trailed behind. Brandon's hands trembled while Lauren whispered, "What exactly is happening?" Yet deep inside they already understood. This was not the end of the courtroom battle. It was just the opening move, and Kevin had already changed the game. Long before Boise, before the lawsuit and all the recognition, Kevin Myers was simply a kid trying to stay unnoticed in Bakersfield, California. His mother, Deirdre Myers, worked night shifts at Mercy Hospital, and his father, when present, painted houses but rarely stayed long enough to leave more than the scent of cigarettes and quiet behind. By the age of 12, Kevin had learned to live in two worlds. One at school where he excelled in spelling bees and science competitions, and one outside where he glanced down whenever police cars passed by. He was neither loud nor showy, but observant of everything around him. In 8th grade, a teacher accused him of stealing a calculator. No one else was questioned, and his locker was searched with nothing discovered. He said nothing at the time, but never forgot how easily adults accepted suspicion without proof. When it was directed at him, it was not anger that motivated him, but the pattern at 17. He won a scholarship to UC Davis, where he studied political science and wrote essays that cut through the clutter. He did not shout. He simply presented the facts, clear, sharp, and precise. In a room filled with opinions, he made silence feel like a final judgment. Law school came next at Stanford. He was admitted without connections or special treatment, relying solely on determination and concentration, while others pursued corporate jobs and paychecks. Kevin completed an internship with the Public Accountability Division in Alameda County. He attended hearings where officers recounted routine stops that resulted in broken ribs and bruised wrists. He recorded every statement, not wearing anger as a shield, but wielding patience like a tool. By the age of 33, Kevin was overseeing reviews for the Western District's Office of Civil Conduct. Quietly, case by case, he built a reputation. Not a dazzling one that grabbed headlines, but one that unsettled departments. He moved with the mind of a lawyer, thought like an investigator, and carried himself as though he already knew what you were hiding. Morgan was his initial assignment as Special Counsel for Civil Accountability, a role established after years of advocacy by watchdog organizations, tired of internal affairs policing themselves. Kevin was carefully chosen by the state board, vetted discreetly, and confirmed. He kept a low profile deliberately. He did not tweet or preach. He simply appeared. That morning outside the bakery, it was not the first time he had been profiled. However, the significance lay in the fact that this was the first time it occurred after his appointment because, for once, he would not have to be the one to file a complaint. He was the complaint itself. He had no desire for vengeance that would seem trivial compared to the work he was undertaking. What he sought was the truth documented. He wanted recurring issues uncovered, and departments alerted that they were under scrutiny. And the observation was not limited to internal sources. Following the event, he did not contact a news agency. Instead, he reached out to a judge. Afterwards, he contacted the office responsible for personnel audits. His badge was not one of traditional authority. It was legislative, granting him the power to request documents, access records, and even reopen cases that had been closed for many years. This was the reason why Brandon and Lauren felt uneasy. It was not about a single arrest, but the entire series of them, because Kevin Myers was not just an ordinary lawyer who appeared by accident. He was the sole individual in the state possessing the clearance and the incentive to review their complete history. Moreover, he did not need to raise his voice to accomplish this. The precinct's atmosphere changed. It was not louder or more hectic, just filled with tension. Brandon Halcroft was the first to notice when he entered the break room and conversations stopped. Not the silence one hears when interrupting a joke, but one where people feared being overheard or saying something inappropriate. He opened the refrigerator, took his lunch, and tried to pretend nothing was amiss. Several hours later, Lauren Mercer sensed the shift as well when she passed a conference room and saw Lieutenant Schaffer speaking quietly with two men in suits. Neither of them wore department insignia. One carried a leather folder tucked under his arm, the type that federal agents often carry. She slowed her pace, trying to catch a name. They stopped their conversation the moment she appeared in sight. That evening, Brandon received a call from his cousin, who is also a police officer in Twin Falls. "Hey, did you arrest someone named Morgan last week?" his cousin asked. Brandon felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. "Why do you ask?" "Because his name is spreading like wildfire. The state audit board, some kind of oversight agency, and the entire precinct here are scrutinizing their reports as if an audit is imminent." Brandon chuckled, but the laughter felt forced. "No, it's nothing. Just a misunderstanding. The guy was foul-mouthed. We let him go." Yet the lie no longer convinced him. 2 days later, the captain summoned them. Not a casual chat or a drop-in moment, but a formal summons demanding full uniform and documentation. Inside the captain's office, the same two suited men from the hallway were seated across the desk. Officers Halcroft and Mercer stood nearby. Captain Rolstad spoke sharply. "This is Mr. Granger and Miss Osai from the Office of Civil Accountability." Miss Osai neither smiled nor blinked much. "We are initiating an internal investigation concerning an incident that took place last Thursday morning involving Mr. Kevin Myers." Brandon's expression became void. "We have already discussed that. He was released. Case closed. Nothing more to it," he replied. "The inquiry extends beyond the arrest," Granger interjected. Lauren sat up straighter in her chair and said, "Excuse me. We are going over your history of complaints, stops, reports filed, and those modified afterward." Captain Rolstad shifted in his seat, then slid a manila folder across the desk. "You will be issued subpoenas to attend the review hearing in 2 weeks." Brandon opened his mouth, but no words emerged. Lauren swallowed deeply and asked, "Are we being charged with something?" "Not yet," Granger answered. "That is exactly the purpose of the hearing." The following morning, an email appeared in both their inboxes. The subject read, "Case Review Summary prepared by Special Counsel K. Morgan." It contained many attachments: old stop reports, body camera timestamps, civilian accounts, all evidence they had assumed would never be connected. Brandon's hands hovered above his keyboard for a full minute before he mustered the strength to click open a file. It was a stop from 3 years prior. A man named Julian York pulled over for a broken taillight, detained for failure to comply. Charges later dismissed. The body cam footage was marked as not uploaded. York's statement claimed he was slammed against his car after asking for a supervisor. Brandon had a vague memory of the incident, but enough to make him close the file with his chest tightening. Lauren messaged him. "They are trying to make it seem like a pattern, Brandon." "It is a pattern," he replied after a pause. "Lauren, we followed protocol." Yet even she sounded uncertain because Kevin was not presenting just one account. He was presenting evidence, and Brandon and Lauren were finally understanding that this was not a routine investigation, but an autopsy. The review hearing did not happen at the police station or courthouse, but in an impartial municipal building. Located on Fairview Avenue, the room was usually reserved for zoning sessions and overlooked city affairs. Yet on this day, every seat in that dull gray conference room seemed charged with tension. Brandon Halcroft adjusted his tie multiple times before entering. Lauren Mercer waited in the hallway, flipping through a slim folder, though she had not actually read a single page for more than 20 minutes. They were not alone. At least a dozen individuals surrounded the large table. Legal monitors, an ethics board member, 2 representatives from the state attorney's office. No uniforms, no familiar faces, no support. At the head of the table sat Kevin Myers. He showed no anger, which would have been easier to confront. Instead, he appeared resolute and ready. Beside him was Mrs. Ose, who started the hearing with a monotone voice. This is a formal evaluation under Article 14. Officers Halcroft and Mercer are present. The charges involve abuse of discretionary power and continual misuse of procedural stops. She then looked at Kevin. Special Counsel Myers, you may begin. Kevin spoke calmly and evenly without raising his voice or leaning forward. This will not be about accusations, he explained. It will focus on patterns. He placed a document on the table, introducing Case 1. Julian York stopped over a broken rear light. Detained for more than 45 minutes without any charges. The report contains no body camera footage. Lauren cleared her throat and said it was 3 years ago, but Kevin did not even look up. Case number 2 involved Alan Rivers, who matched the description of a robbery suspect. The same precinct handled the case, and the report used identical language. He was also detained without probable cause and released without charges. Kevin slid another paper forward. Case number 3 featured the same officers and similar wording. Someone fitting the description exhibiting suspicious behavior, non-compliant tone. Brandon leaned closer and said, "We respond to calls as they arrive. We do not control the descriptions." But Kevin answered, "You control how long a person is held. You control whether IDs are checked or questions asked before making assumptions. You control your tone and language as well as how many times someone without a criminal record leaves with bruises and no apologies." Kevin pulled out a printed map dotted with red pins. These mark every stop these two have made over the past 5 years. The pins are not scattered randomly, but grouped tightly on certain streets and specific neighborhoods. Kevin continued, "We compared your stop data with 3 other patrol teams. Your average number of stops is 42% higher, and 80% of those stops involve individuals from one particular demographic. 90% of these encounters end with no charges," Miss Ose added softly. Lauren's voice grew firmer as she said, "That is not policing, but profiling." "So what? Are we being judged for doing our jobs, responding to calls, and following protocol?" "You are not on trial," Kevin said with calm determination. "You are under review. A review triggered because, for once, you confronted the wrong individual, not someone with lesser credibility, not someone without options. Me." He paused, allowing the words to sink in. "I was nothing special that day. I did not carry an official badge. I was merely a man standing outside a bakery, and you deemed that sufficient." Brandon breathed out through his nose. "We had an assignment. We never aimed at you. You had no obligation," Kenton replied. "Because you created a system where the targeting occurs automatically." He glanced around the room, then back at Brandon and Lauren. "You cannot resolve what you refuse to acknowledge." Silence stretched on for an extended time. It did not feel like triumph. It felt precise. This was not revenge. It was revelation. And in that room, every overlooked detail, every hastened report, every dismissed civilian complaint resurfaced, because when you repeat the same decision continuously, it ceases to be an error It becomes your identity. By the time the second day of the review began, Brandon Halcroft was unraveling. He arrived appearing older eyes, lifeless jaw, tightly clenched posture, stiffer than usual. He spoke little to Lauren, he hardly even glanced at her. She remained composed, or at least seemed so. She carried the same stubbornness she always had, but something in her eyes betrayed her. She was scanning the room too intently, watching too carefully. Kevin Myers did not come with outrage. He brought testimony one after another. They stepped forward. Julian York, the man from the taillight stop, shared his experience, explaining how he requested a supervisor and ended up with a strained wrist. He recounted submitting a complaint that led nowhere and never receiving any follow-up. Only silence. Ellen Rivers, mistakenly identified as a robbery suspect while walking home carrying groceries, described being forcefully thrown to the ground in front of her daughter. She did not speak for several days afterward. Brandon shifted in his seat during that testimony. Not everyone attended, but those who did spoke calmly without shouting or casting blame. They simply shared their experiences, which made it even tougher because Brandon and Lauren could not find flaws in their accounts. It was just that straightforward and human. Lauren folded her arms firmly and said, "We have witnessed the worst in people. We cannot afford to hesitate when details match." Kevin did not reply immediately. He regarded her thoughtfully, as if analyzing where the weaknesses in the argument lay. "Perhaps the issue lies in what you define as a match," he finally remarked. Brandon's voice broke slightly. "You don't understand what it feels like to navigate those streets daily. People lie to you, threaten you, flee from you, and it alters how you interpret situations." Kevin nodded slightly. "I do not dispute that this job is difficult, but when the same type of face repeatedly suffers for the actions of others, it ceases to be about danger and turns into something about familiarity, about comfort." Lauren scoffed. Yes, the comfort found in predictable assumptions, the ease of never being the one left on the ground. Brandon's shoulders dropped just a bit, and then Morgan opened another folder. 3 reports submitted within the last 24 months reveal signs of tampered body camera footage uploads. One recording was marked as corrupted while another was never submitted at all. Brandon glanced up slowly and heavily and said that was a technical problem, something beyond their control. Kevin showed no reaction. It was not your fault the first or maybe even the second time. But now this was the 4th occurrence. For the first time, Lauren had no reply. The burden of the reports and video patterns was beginning to weigh on them in unexpected ways. They had always felt protected and shielded, yet that defense was full of cracks. Kevin was not aggressively attacking, but merely illuminating the weaknesses. One of the panel members, herself a former officer, leaned forward asking if either of them admitted that their practices might have caused harm. Lauren looked at her, then at the table, and slowly responded, "We have always done what we were trained to do." The words lingered between them. Kevin spoke softly. "Perhaps it is time we start teaching something different, because once you acknowledge the cracks, you cannot pretend the wall still stands." The final day of the hearing did not open with drama. There was no gavel strike or raised voices, only the quiet rustling of papers and the tense silence of those aware that this story was nearing its end. Not everyone would leave in the same state. Brandon and Lauren sat next to each other, still in uniform, but their demeanor had shifted. Brandon stopped defending himself and remained silent, while Lauren crossed her arms, withholding any further words. Eyes straight ahead, lips pressed firmly together, no longer confident but tense. Kevin Myers rose and moved to the center of the room alone. No backup, no legal advisors, no dramatics, just himself and a folder with edges worn from frequent handling. He placed it carefully on the table and began. I have said everything I needed to say. You have heard from those affected, reviewed the statistics, examined the language in the reports, and seen the recovered footage. You've heard the same words recited, witnessed the same tactics, noticed the same individuals being stopped, questioned, handcuffed, and then quietly released. He glanced at Brandon. I do not believe either of you joined this department with harmful motives, but at some point, you stopped self-reflecting. You ceased seeing people as individuals and began seeing only profiles. The room remained quiet. I am not here to destroy your careers. That would not be justice. I am here because the system is incapable of repairing itself if it continues to shield patterns that clearly fail, he said, pausing to face the review board. My suggestion is this. Officers Halcroft and Mercer be relieved of their field duties indefinitely until they undergo further training, psychological examination, and a full departmental review. Additionally, I am requesting that the cases identified during this review be officially reopened. Brandon looked down, not even reacting. He was expecting this. Lauren whispered softly. It was just a job. Kevin turned to her. No, it was a responsibility. And when you forget that. Injuries had occurred, so the board entered a closed session. After 35 minutes, they came back with their decision. Brandon Halcroft was suspended from active duty and relieved of his badge pending further evaluation. Lauren Mercer received the same outcome. Neither officer spoke as the ruling was announced, and neither resisted it. There was no dramatic departure, no chair slamming, just two officers who had long believed their roles shielded them from consequences. Kevin quietly packed his belongings, and on his way out he stopped by Brandon, who glanced up at him briefly. Brandon said, I never thought it would end like this. Kevin answered, It didn't have to. Then added, But that was not up to me, before leaving without another word. That evening, Brandon sorted through his locker alone. Lauren never showed up. Rumors had it she took personal leave. Nobody reached out. The same people who once celebrated them at retirement gatherings and year-end ceremonies suddenly seemed too busy or constantly on call. The precinct began to feel the weight of suspicion. A new poster appeared in the corridor near the squad room advertising a civil accountability hotline promising confidentiality. Some rookies stared at it a little too long. Meanwhile, Kevin flew to Coeur d'Alene the very next morning. Another city, another precinct, another discreet review. His work wasn't about headlines, but about systems, truth, and lasting reform. He didn't seek praise, only wanted the walls to stop concealing the fractures. Because when no one supervises the supervisors, the cycle never ends, but now at last, someone is paying attention. 2 months later, the city of Boise was still in the process of adapting, while the media had mostly moved on. There were no large protests or sensational headlines, yet something beneath the surface had changed. Those who paid close attention could sense it. Kevin Myers did not stay around, as he was never intended to. His role required traveling from city to city, handling cases without remaining long enough to become part of the narrative. He sought no recognition or spotlight. His sole desire was that there should be consequences for everyone involved, not only the powerless. However, the impact of what occurred did not disappear with his departure. The training manual at the Boise precinct was revised, not drastically, but enough to make a difference. Officers were now mandated to review genuine case footage instead of staged scenarios of mishandled stops. Kevin's case became an example used for this training. New recruits were asked a question during orientation. Have you ever made a mistake and learned from it? This was not meant to shame, but to assess if someone could take responsibility before earning their badge. Brandon Halcroft accepted a position in the city's vehicle impound division, a quiet, unarmed role behind a desk. He never spoke about the hearing and did not act as though he had been wronged. Some believed he was bitter, while others felt he had finally begun to listen. Lauren Mercer never came back. Rumors said she relocated to Wyoming to be closer to her sister. She deactivated her social media accounts and refused interview requests. Although she did not openly dispute the board's conclusions, she did not accept them either. Meanwhile, those who had been stopped, handcuffed, and publicly humiliated without cause were left to live with the lasting effect of those moments. Some received apologies, not all but a few. Julian York got a handwritten note from the mayor's office. Lauren Rivers received a follow-up phone call from the city attorney, inquiring if he would consider mediation. There were no flashy headlines or publicized settlements, just subtle signs that something had truly hit a nerve. This was the part most people overlooked. Justice does not always arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it simply means someone finally pays attention. A person in authority is compelled to answer, and perhaps next time someone might hesitate before treating a man in a navy jacket as a suspect instead of a human being. That day outside the bakery could have happened to anybody. But it happened to Kevin Myers, a man who had spent his life witnessing people being silenced. When it was his turn, he did not yell or threaten. Instead, he held up a mirror to reflect their actions. For the first time, they were forced to see themselves. The takeaway was not that Brandon and Lauren were wicked or strange. It was how easily people stop recognizing others as individuals. This habit becomes perilous when those who commit it wear a badge. Perhaps, just maybe, someone in that precinct, a young officer with fresh boots and a spotless badge, would remember this incident the next time a vague description came over the radio. They might pause, ask a question, and verify an ID before a wrist is grabbed. That may be enough to save a life or more, because change does not always roar. Sometimes it quietly leaves a courthouse, holding a folder packed with names and ensuring such events never repeat. If you think stories like these need to be shared, if you feel that honesty should unsettle us enough to encourage growth, then subscribe to this channel. Every narrative brings us closer to insight. Let us not turn away when it truly counts.